Hi guys, I am here in Cambridge, England. My husband had to speak at a conference here, so I'm taking advantage of tracing down some Methodist history here. Behind me is the Fitzwilliam Museum. In his will, Richard Fitzwilliam, the 7th Viscount Fitzwilliam of Marion, left his huge collection of artwork as well as £100,000 to the University of Cambridge for the construction of this museum. His wealth had come from the money his grandfather made in the transatlantic slave trade in the 18th century. This museum acknowledges that their wealth is rooted in the slave trade and is committed to working towards reparative justice.
In this vein, they organized an exhibit entitled Rise Up. The exhibit looked at the period from 1750 to 1850, when Britain's was the first industrialized nation, but also the largest trafficker of captain African people. The exhibit draws on the role of Black and white anti-slavery groups during this time, highlighting ones from Cambridge. Inside the exhibit, I was excited to recognize some names from our Methodist history class.
The first featured abolitionist in the exhibit was Olaudah Equiano, also known as Gustavus Vasa. He was the African who was the most famous and influential Black abolitionist writer of his day. And in our class, we learned that it was his autobiography that John Wesley mentioned in his last letter to Wilberforce, recommending that Wilberforce read it. Equiano was a very big anti-slavery lobbyist. He also approved this portrait of himself to be included with his autobiography. And in this portrait, it's very striking the way he is dressed as a very established, successful gentleman of the times. And he is also holding forth a Bible written in the English language. A year before he published the first edition of his autobiography, Equiano had published a response to two racist pamphlets which were circulating. These pamphlets had been written by pro-slavery activist James Tobin. Tobin was trying to undermine equality and calling for racial purity. Equiano, in his pamphlet, defended intermarriage. He used biblical arguments, and he proposed that intermarriage would actually strengthen the British nation. This is a portrait by artist Joy Labinjo. She was born in 1994, and her art fuses her Black, British, and Nigerian identity to reimagine Equiano. She actually had quite a few works throughout the exhibit. Equiano married a white British woman in April of 1792. His wife's name was Susanna Cullen, and they had two daughters, Anna Maria and Johanna. Unfortunately, Susanna, the wife, died only 5 years later, and Equiano himself died 1 year after that. Their older daughter passed away just a few months after he did, but their younger daughter inherited the father's estate, which was substantial enough for him to have written a will. And this again is a portrait by Joy Labinjo, imagining this interracial family in the late 18th century. This is a portrait that was also featured in this exhibit. This is Selina, the Countess of Huntington, that we can remember from Wesley's early days with George Whitefield. She was active in the new evangelical Methodist movement, and she was also, although she owned plantations in South Carolina, she also dedicated herself to some work in abolition. So she was a very contradictory figure, but she did sponsor books by Phyllis Wheatley, Equiano, and she also actively supported John Marrant. John Marrant was an American-born freeman, musician, and he was a Methodist preacher. He was pressed into the Royal Navy and survived sea battles. He had had time before that among the indigenous American Cherokee communities in South Carolina. But when he came to England, his autobiography was published to much success. It was sponsored by the Countess of Huntingdon, and when they received a request in Nova Scotia for a preacher to come there, John Marrant was ordained as a Methodist minister in Bath in May of 1785, and he was sent to Nova Scotia. While he was there, he ministered, and he actually ordained two Black ministers, Cato Perkins and William Ashe, to carry on after him before he returned to England in 1789. I was excited to find Zilpha Elah in this exhibit. I had written a paper on Zilpha Elah for church history. She was a free woman who felt called to preach, and after a successful preaching career in America, felt called to preach in England. I found that she had preached in Cambridge in 1856, and I wanted to find out where she would have been preaching amongst the Methodists. Hi guys, it's a really busy Saturday here in Cambridge, and I am standing across from Christ College. You can notice how light the bricks are there. The Methodists didn't have a presence here really until 1805, when they began to rent a room in the inn yard of the Brazen George. It was near Christ College here. They outgrew that space twice. They had to move to Barnwell Chapel and then also Green Street. By 1849, they had built a chapel on Hobson Street, and that chapel opened with its first service being the Good Friday service, April 4th, 1849. So that chapel no longer exists, but it was constructed of the same color bricks that are behind me. And I'm here where St. Andrew's Street meets Hobson, and I'm going to take a walk up Hobson and kind of see if we can find the same color bricks and see maybe where that chapel existed.